Glorious liberty. Are we on? Okay. It's good to hear testimonies. Got new glasses looking at me. There you go. I'm going to get used to that. Oh. We've been on a long series. If you've noticed, we've never left Habakkuk. We've gone all the way through the Bible. We've still never left Habakkuk. So we're going to go back there. We're going to start back in Habakkuk 2. As we go on through this next year, I don't know if y'all remembered with all the turmoil out there, but we're in one of those fun years called an election year. So everything's going to be ramping up in a few months, and the turmoil of the world is going to start going, and it's already starting to go around in other parts of the world, and it's about to be interesting. We're not going to change our subject for that, but I want you to keep that in the background, because if there's one thing that I know I'm praying for, I hope others are praying for, is that the revelation that was given to Habakkuk is the revelation that the church desperately needs today in this time. So we've gone through an awful lot. We've gone through Psalms 12, where we've talked about the godly man ceasing. We've gone through Psalm 44, where it was talking about remembering what God did with our fathers. We even went through last week, if you heard it on our live stream service, where we were going back through the history of how God deals with sin. And sin always brings forth a curse. And that how we were originally created as spirits in these earthly bodies. And that now that serves as our picture type for either our primary life, way we see things, what we need satisfied being this earthly, lustly, dead thing, or the new spirit in Christ. And how we even went through in Romans, how it described that as soon as we take what was given by God and we exalt that over God himself, that his response is to give you over to it. That is, that the first judgment for sin is not what we think of as judgment and declaring something guilty and sending it forth to destruction. The very first judgment for sin is the allowance for sin to continue. That sin is in itself its very first judgment for its own existence. That we choose sin over the Creator, and God gives us the sin that we've chosen. And in that giving over, we find our first judgment. And so we're going to go back to Habakkuk 2 today, because Habakkuk gets an answer. If you remember, as we discussed about Habakkuk 1, the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, they're coming in. They are conquering. And so Habakkuk's sitting there looking and saying, we're the people of God. We're the ones that God have always protected. And he's used other nations to judge us before, but it's never been this bad. Oh God, how can you let this happen? How can you let all this torment, all this difficulty happen? Now, how can you sit back, you who can't look upon iniquity, how can you blink and look upon what's going on here without doing anything? And that was his cry. And he clearly stated in chapter 2, verse 1, that he fully expected to get reproved from it, but that's where he was honestly at. When you question God, God's going to answer. You don't get to be Job without the response to Job. You don't get to be the one that questions everything God doing without getting an answer, and that answer partly being, you need to stay in your lane. Get in your place, I am God and you are not. But there's a revelation given to Habakkuk that I pray is given to each of you here today and everyone listening online. I'll just start in chapter 2. It says, I will stand upon my watch and will set me upon the tower and will watch to see what he will say unto me and what I shall answer when I am reproved. And the Lord answered me and said," oh, the Lord answers prayer. Amen. We got to start there. I know last time we read this, I stopped there too, but we always have to stop there. He answers prayer. He might not answer with the answer you like. He might not answer in the timing that you like or in the manner that you like, but he answers. It says, "The Lord answered me and said, Write the visions and make it plain upon tables, that he may run that readeth it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but the end it shall speak and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. Behold, his soul which is lifted up is not upright in him, but the just shall live by faith." And we began telling you how this verse is the foundation for the three major doctrinal books in the New Testament, the Romans and Galatians and Hebrews. The verse is quoted in each of them to bring us back to this very problem that Habakkuk is dealing with, this very situation that he's looking at. He immediately is comparing two different people. Those who are haughty and lifted up, who have lifted up themselves and their soul is not right within them, and the just that are living by faith. And we have to begin with that dichotomy, because this is not the dichotomy that Habakkuk is beginning with. All right? What he is beginning with is chapter 1, verse 13. "Thou art of purer eyes than to behold evil, and canst not look on iniquity. Wherefore lookest thou upon them that deal treacherously, and holdest thy tongue when the wicked devoureth the man that is more righteous than he." He's immediately beginning this conversation from the perspective of there are good people and there are bad people. I'm one of the good people, and why are you letting the bad people do this? Now it's deeper than that, because they were God's chosen people. But they weren't coming from the position of owning themselves as God's chosen people. That was their badge of excuse to get away with whatever they wanted and still feel self-righteous. The wicked devoureth the man that is more righteous than he. We have to start there, because that is the way our modern culture has ingrained everything into us. All of our problems are caused by those wicked leftists who are trying to come in and ruin everything. Or it's those deplorables on the right who are coming in and trying to take away your that's how we fundamentally see the world, that there are those bad people over there and the good people over here, and I just so happen to identify with the group that is the good people. And he's saying, no. We've got the man whose soul is lifted up in him, who is not upright. And we've got the just who are living by faith. You see, you've taken this situation, you've seen it completely wrong. Because while, yes, in human terms, those Chaldeans who are coming in and are laying waste to all of your cities, yes, those are your human enemies. But they're not your problem. They never have been. Your problem is not that there's sin in the world. The problem is not that other people around you embrace it and you have to deal with an increasing amount of consequences of their sin. Church, if that's the way you see the world, you twist it and you miss it. There are those whose soul is lifted up and not upright, and those who are living by faith. There are those who are just. So he goes in and he goes through the rest of the chapter to deal with the people whose soul is lifted up and not upright in him. For the rest of the chapter, we have this description of the Chaldeans. We have the description of the fallen world. We have the description of the given over ones. If you remember our description last week in Romans 1, the given over ones are those in Romans 1 who have fully known the existence of the Creator and denied him, and taken the creation and exalted that. And by creation, I mean you, me, myself. I have taken him and I've removed him from the equation. I've looked at myself and I've lifted myself up and say that what I think, what I feel, and what I believe is what is true, and everybody else around me is going to have to deal with what I say reality is. And he gives over and immediately goes into the sexual, and immediately goes into the vile, and immediately goes into the perverse, because that's what this body is. That's what this death is. It is the embodiment of lust and the pursuit of fulfillment. And so he begins, and he's talking to Habakkuk. He's talking to Israel. He's talking to Judah. But he does so by describing the world, the ones who have been given over. And how does he describe them? We looked in Psalm 44 the other week about how immediately with judgment, those who found themselves under judgment identified more with the serpent and the dust than they did with their Creator. And so now we're talking about a people who are upright in their own eyes. They're not upright. They're lifted up in their own eyes, but they're not upright. They are the embodiment of pride and sin in the world. But they don't see it that way. They see themselves as the good ones who are fighting for their own rights. So instead of them seeing themselves as cursed and writing on the ground, he says, you are like hell. You are the embodiment of hell on earth. Don't take me wrong. There is a hell. I'm not taking away from the doctrine of the existence of a real, literal burning hell. We're not going, but using that as the comparison. You are the embodiment, O lifted up and unrighteous man. You are the embodiment of hell on earth. Yea, because he transgresseth by wine, he is a proud man, neither keepeth at home, who enlargeth his desire as hell, and is as death, and cannot be satisfied. That describes, as we go through this, it's describing the given over human nature, but it's also describing this on a national scale. All right, so he goes through and he describes this given over one through 5 woes, through 5 curses. And as we go through these, we're going to look at them in terms of going from fruit to root. We're looking at the first one we go through is going to be the biggest one that everybody can see. And as we go down the list, it gets all the way to the root that started, that the first one came from. All right? So we're going from fruit to root. And as you'll find out as we go through here, is describing a curse on the upright man. It's describing a curse that is not first carried out by God. There is a final judgment that is carried out by God, and he's very explicit about that. We're not taking away from that. But the first set of woes, the first set of curses on this upright man is the very consequence of his own sin. Let's continue. Verse 6. Shall not all these take up a parable against him, and a taunting proverb against him? That means that when his sin is finally blooming to its peak, and he just thinks that he has risen on high and he's achieved all of his goals and he is now king of the hill, the consequence of all of his sin is going to come rushing over him, and he is going to be as the one who is mocked in the streets from everybody. He's going to have a parable against him. He's going to have a taunting proverb. He's going to be a byword in the street of everybody around who has mocked the one who thought that he was so great. And so they would say, woe to him. Woe is a very strong curse. This isn't our English of some ghost walking around the halls going, whoa. This is a very strong curse in the Hebrew. Woe to him that increaseth that which is not his. How long? And to him that ladeth himself with thick clay. We start out with fruit. We start out with the biggest one. We start out with not just the behaviors of the individual, but the behavior as a nation as a whole. So let me put this into American terms so we can understand this, because I hope after the past couple of weeks that word clay just like rings out with dust and curse and ground. All right? The word that is translated clay has that connotation, but its strongest definition is allegiance. All right? So the topic here is, and this shouldn't be too controversial, it's been happening for 60 years. The idea of a nation, maybe a bigger nation, looking around at a smaller nation and going, they have something we want. We're big. We have no desire to pay market price. So, what we're going to go do is we're going to go not wage war and steal. We're going to go and form a coup in that nation. We're going to go in that nation and we're going to depose whoever was gotten into power through whatever government structure they have. And we're going to instill our own dictator who just so happens to be willing to pay allegiance to us and then sell all of their stuff to us at the price we would want to pay for it. And pillage and plunder through allegiance, through the deception and behind the scenes, so that we are the bigger ones who look how good we are, because look at how much allegiance we have from all of these smaller people. I'll forget the fact that we've made all of our riches off of this theft from all of these smaller nations. That is, woe to him that increases that which is not his. By theft that goes in, this is the description of the slave mentality, of whether it's the chattel slavery like before the Civil War, or whether it's the slave wage type mentality that we have now. It is the idea of, I build mine from taking from you. And not only do I do that, but I build mine by taking from you in a way that requires you to then pay homage and allegiance back to me, so that I can see myself growing by taking advantage of everybody else. That's woe to him that increaseth that which is not his. How long? And to him that layeth himself with thick clay. We take all of the other humans and stick them to myself, and I seem to be bigger because of it. So shall they not rise up suddenly that shall bite thee? All those little nations that have done it, all of a sudden, all the people leave them and try to illegally enter your nation, and you'll wonder why you have a illegal immigrant issue. I know but that's the description we have. The unrighteousness by which we believe that we have the right to take from others to make ourselves better. So shall they not rise? Because remember, the woe is, this is what you do. Is it not? Can you not be surprised that everybody that you have betrayed this way is going to come up and destroy you? Shall they not rise up suddenly that shall bite thee, and awake that shall vex thee? And thou shalt be for booties unto them, because thou hast spoiled many nations. All the remnant of the people shall spoil thee, because of men's blood, and for the violence of the land, of the city, and of all that dwell therein. And the point of this is not to get political. The point of this is to see that this is the nation that is invading Israel. This is the method of judgment God is using for the rebellion of Israel. This is the method of judgment for the church being in rebellion before God. So we have our second woe. Woe to him that coveteth an evil covetousness to his house, that he may set his nest on high, that he may be delivered from the power of evil. I want you to get an idea of mountaintops, of eagles setting up a nest in the tallest tree. I want you to setting up a castle on the highest mountain peak. The idea that you have the ability to set up your life in a way that is judgment-proof, a way that you believe that no one else could possibly come in and find fault with you, and if they do, it's just those little peons that can't touch you anyway. All right? This is the human political version of I will ascend to the Most High. This is the ongoing political idea of the Tower of Babel, where we're going to build the tower to the sky. That woe to him that coveteth an evil covetousness. No, woe to him that gaineth an evil gain. Woe to him that goes after something in a way that makes him look like he's righteous and untouchable, when what he's really done is set himself apart from everybody and destroyed all of the relationships around him, because he's seen everybody that will not pay homage to him as an enemy. That he may set his nest on high, that he may be delivered from the power of evil. Thou hast consulted shame to thy house by cutting off many people. See, this is where we're going from fruit to root. So the last one, the mindset of coming in and saying that I grow by taking from you, comes from the dehumanizing of everybody else around you. And there's actually a theory. This is a rabbit trail. There's actually a theory. I guess it's a philosophical theory or a psychological problem, one of the two, that there are individuals, we maybe used to call them psychopaths or something like that they believe that they are the only humans and everybody else is an NPC. If you don't know what an NPC is, we have video games, and you go in and you play a video game, and you've got your character and he does everything, and you've got the characters that you go up and talk to, and they might give you a hint about where to go next in the video game. All the different characters that aren't playable, they're just part of the computer game, they are non-playing characters. They're NPCs. So there's the idea that people would believe that I'm really the only one that exists, and all of y'all are just non-player characters in my world. And so therefore it doesn't really matter what I do to you, because you're not real anyway. This is the end result of the human ego, that I'm the one that matters. There's a certain psychopathy that takes you that far in the solid belief of it, but our unbridled lust takes us there. That I'm the only one that can, everybody else who shows emotion is just acting. My emotions are the only ones that are real. Everybody's got their own opinion, but my opinion is the only one that's truth. And you do that long enough and you burn all your bridges. You just start seeing everybody else as just something that has to be manipulated or gone along with or played until you can get what you want from them. Woe to him that coveteth an evil covetousness to his house, that he may set his nest on high, that he may be delivered from the power of evil. Thou hast consulted shame to thy house by cutting off many people, and hast sinned against thine own soul. For the stone shall cry out of the wall, and the beam out of the timber shall answer it. Oh, we know that if nobody will praise the Lord, even the stones will shout. But this goes even way farther back in the scripture than that. This goes into, O Cain, what have you done? The blood of Abel cries out from the ground. See, if nobody else around you is able to get close enough to you to actually tell you what's going on, the stones will have to do it, because the blood of your sins will rise up from the earth and cry out for judgment and for justice. For the stone shall cry out of the wall. Because we know that even the creature groaneth and travails for the fulfillment of the promise. Stones will cry out. Verse 12, woe to him. We've got our third woe. We've gotten our big national political, how we deal with nations. We've got our how we see individuals and why we would even be willing to set up a nation that way. That for whatever reason, probably the blessing of God. And I know in this nation it was that way because of the blessing of God, because of getting us all the way through that greatest generation up through the mid-40s, and then it went to our head and we became ego-filled, and it became all about us being the greatest nation instead of God having made us the greatest nation. And this downward spiral just continues. Verse 12, woe to him that buildeth a town with blood, and that establisheth a city by iniquity. How in the world can you set your own house like a eagle's nest, as if you are high above everybody else because nobody else is really, they don't really exist, they don't really matter, they're not real because they're not me. Well, it's the depersonalization through constant attack. Woe to him that buildeth a town with blood. Oh, even in the human, don't we know that one of the warning signs for the psychopathic personality is to go back to their childhood and see them being hostile to animals and killing and harming animals. The practice of shedding blood, it hardens something. Yeah. But we start out there. We start out through the actions that have to harden. So woe to him that buildeth a town with blood. Again, we're still talking about the given over ones that God is using as judgment on Israel. And this is the point that's getting illuminated, Habakkuk. Woe to him that buildeth a town with blood and establish a city by iniquity. Behold, is it not of the Lord of hosts that the people shall labor in the very fire, and the people shall weary themselves for vanity? For the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. Again, we're talking about woes, we're talking about curses, but we're also talking about them from the perspective of the people who will come after them, talking down about these people because of what they've done. This is their proverb, this is their taunting song, this is their byword in the street, this is their reputation. Is it not of the Lord of hosts that the people shall labor in the very fire, and the people shall weary themselves for very vanity? There is one God. There is one truth. There is one history. There is one story of redemption. There is one goal that is God-driven. And then we have all of ours that we try to take off from that and have our own. All right? So that God may be trying to build this thing over here, but I'm trying to build this thing over here. All right? So, behold, is it not of the Lord of hosts that he responds to this by continuing to build his stuff and letting you build yours? So that the more you build yours, the more destruction gets heaped upon it, simply because it is going different direction than the way he's going. And he is life, he is the creator, he is the source of all things. If he's going this way, anybody going that way is going to perish. Not primarily by judgment, although there will be judgment, but first because they're going in the wrong direction. Yeah. It's like it's trying to run against a treadmill. Is it not of the Lord of hosts that the people shall labor in the fire? He will let them do all of the work they can do, knowing that it's only going to hasten their end and quicken their demise. It's only going to highlight their very vanity, because it can never produce what it is they say they're trying to produce. And they're doing it in the face of the one who is producing the life that they say they want. They say they want life, they just don't want his, as if there is any other life than what comes from him. So he will let them do their sinful labor, because it will highlight the difference between what they're doing and what he's doing. And let's not forget the prayer that went up in Habakkuk 1. What was the prayer? God, how can you let this out? All this, have you forgotten us down here, God? You're blinking up there. You're not doing a thing, and all these bad things. The reason that we know it's for judgment, yes, of course, I know it's for judgment, but we also know the real reason it's happening is because you got off the throne and you started ignoring us, and so they took over. And what we need you to do is get back on the throne and come down here and fight for the good ones. Thank you very much. God, will you please do your job and defend us? Because we're the good ones, they're the bad ones, so we need to invoke your presence to protect the good ones from the bad ones, and that's what this is all about, because we need your presence to get all of those wicked ones out so that the good ones can finally be free again. No, they might say make America great again, but what the church really means is make the church in charge again. Put the good ones back in charge, God. You got to get the bad ones back out and set the good ones back right, and then you can get back off the throne and do your thing again. But we've got a problem down here, God. He's showing him, no, I never got off the throne. Everything, all the difficulty that you're walking through now is not outside of my plan. I'm letting him. The very people shall labor in the very fire, and the people shall weary themselves for very vanity. Got enough varies in there? For the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord. Did not say they would want to know it. It would not even say that they would agree with it. It says they're going to know it. Whether they agree with it or want it or not, they're going to know who God is and who the creature is. Yeah. As the waters cover the sea, we got our fourth woe. We're going from national to personal. If you haven't noticed this, now we're getting even more personal. Woe unto him that giveth his neighbor drink, and puttest thy bottle to him, and makest him drunken also, that thou mayest look on their nakedness. That I can teach my vanity in order to take from them that which is most personal, that which is most precious. How many generations did it take to go from, what was it called? The Hays Code. Everybody here is probably too young to remember the Hays Code. All right? And I'm just using this as an example. I'm not exalting this thing. That's just an example. But the Hays Code was way back in the day. See, right now we have a rating system for movies, the MPAA, something like that. All right. G, PG, PG-13, R, they tell you what's in them. All right, and that's the purpose of what it is, to let you know the level of content that is in the movie. Before there was the MPAA, we had something called the Hays Code. The Hays Code was that there would not be allowed anything in a movie that would decrease the moral character of the person watching it. That was the entire thing. If it would decrease the moral standing of the person watching it, it wasn't allowed to be in a movie. Oh, how far we have come. How many generations did it take for the standard to be protect innocence, to take as much of their innocence from them as early as possible? How many generations did that take? That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about through deceit and through playing off of somebody else's lust, use their own lust against them so that I can take away their innocence, and by taking away their innocence, I can satisfy my own lusts. How many generations did it take to go from the Hays Code to, oh, you've got some financial difficulties? Start your own porn site. Here's the app that'll allow you to do it. How many generations did that take? That our first thought now. Do you know how many good biblical phrases and ideas and church signs that we just can't do anymore because the worldly use of the words has twisted the meaning so badly that it just makes stuff disgusting? I'm not going to give examples, but if you know, you know. That the idea of taking and stealing innocence. If we were to go back this from root to fruit, then we'd see taking innocence and then taking life and then seeing my life as the only one that's valuable to me being able to use and abuse everyone else around me, and they're only there to bolster my existence. You see how this transition goes on. This is the description of the ongoing life of the given over ones. And the problem is, America doesn't look good on this list. That's why we need to get to the revelation of Habakkuk. Because we can't get to the revelation without going through the description. Verse 15, woe unto him that giveth his neighbor drink, that putteth thy bottle to him, and maketh him drunken also, that thou mayest look on their nakedness. Thou art filled with shame for glory. That means you see shame as glorious. That means that everything that people would see and go, wow, they're shameless. They do all this wickedness, and they seem to they don't even know that they're naked anymore. They just full of shame, and they see that as the greatest thing in the world. It goes right in there with Romans 1 and the given over nature, but it shouldn't be a surprise that if you were to have, say, a parade for a certain community, that it wouldn't just be a bunch of those people in the community going out and lifting banners and saying, rah, 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 here we are so great, but they have to put on the full debauchery on display in the middle of the road, and they see that as, here we are here, and look at the display of our wonderful life. And they have no shame, but they see it as their glory. Yes. Thou art filled with shame for glory. Drink thou also, and let thy foreskin be uncovered. The cup of the Lord's right hand shall be turned unto thee, and shameful spewing shall be upon thy glory. Let's describe it this way. You're filled with shame for glory, so keep at it. Drink also. You drunkard, keep drinking, is the idea. But the idea is that if you are to uncover your own nakedness, it's not allowing me to be PG. I'm trying hard. For you to uncover your own nakedness is to uncover the fact that you are a people without a promise. And being a people without a promise, you are inherently a people with no hope. Right. Let thy foreskin be uncovered. That was the sign of the promise, if you remember, that they would be circumcised. Yeah. No, that it was. No, we won't go into all that doctrine right now, but the idea is, if you're going to just be shameful and be uncovered and see that as your glory, you're showing to the world that you are a people without a God. You are a people without the promise. And so the cup of the Lord's right hand, the wrath of the Lord shall be turned to you. But it's going to be turned to you in the drink thou also. It's turned to you in the full display of the shame of your promiseless people without hope. The idea is that method of display, you will drink so much that you get sick and vomit, and the vomit from your imbibing will cover all of your shame. And so now the consequences of your overindulging on your own glory is going to heap shame upon shame. It's going to degradation upon degradation. That you're going to be a people that were unable to hold their liquor. They went too far, they partied too much, and now you see them in the street laying down, having thrown up with everything cover them, and there will be a mockery and a shame to all that would pass by and see how far their sin took them. The shameful spewing shall be upon thy glory, which their glory is their shame. For the violence of Lebanon shall cover thee, and the spoil of beasts which has made them afraid because of men's blood, and for the violence of the land, of the city, and of all them that dwell therein. They're still in the national level, but it's getting more personal. And you say, Chris, how can you identify all of this as the given over ones? Isn't that a little out of place? Well, no, we got our last woe that will demonstrate that. What profiteth the graven image that the maker thereof hath graven it? The molten image and a teacher of lies, that the maker of his work trusted therein to make dumb idols? Woe to him that saith to the wood, awake, to the dumb stone, arise, and it shall teach. What is the one thing it took to become the given over ones. Oh, I'll read it. It was Romans 1. I did not plan to read it. Give me a second. Let's see. Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made unto like corruptible man, and to birds, and to four-footed beasts, and to creeping things they made idols. Wherefore God also gave them up to their uncleanness. The very result of idolatry is to be given over to it. And that is the first judgment of God, for you to say, okay, if you're going to trust in this thing, you're going to get what's coming from it. But the Lord in his holy temple, verse 19, woe unto him that saith to the wood, awake, and to the dumb stone, arise, it shall teach. Behold, it is laid over with gold and silver, and there is no breath at all in the midst of it. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. All right, so God has just answered Habakkuk. Habakkuk has started from, God, they're the bad ones, we're the good ones. Get back on the throne and rescue us from the bad ones. And he's gone through and says, look at what's going to happen to the ones that you call the bad ones. Look at all the woes that are set upon them. Look at the sin that drives them. Look at what they've been given over to. And know that what they've been given over to is ultimately going to be their own destruction, so much so that everybody around them is going to use it. And what is the phrase that is said? Shall not all these take up a parable against him and a taunting proverb? That all these woes are going to be made evident so that all the sin that brought them down will be made manifest. So everybody will know and will be able to say, look at him who did this. How foolish was he? So, chapter 3. A prayer of Habakkuk, the prophet, upon Shigionoth. This is a psalm out of place. If you go to the very last verse, it says, to the chief singer on my stringed instruments. And if you know me, I can't go past Shigionoth without describing it, just because it's in my nature. We're going to try really, really hard to go through this without getting sidetracked on all the interesting things. Because I'm going to try very hard. Because his response is so richly layered with the promises of God, with the promises of God that have already been fulfilled, wrapped up in the language of creation. And when I say the language of creation, I don't mean the language of Genesis, where he said, and God spoke and said, let there be. You know, there's a lot of great stuff in Genesis. But there's an interesting thing about the creation speak in Job. All right? Because there's one thing about, and God said, and there was. And he did, and it happened, and that's the way creation is. And he said, and he caused the waters to separate from the land. You know, there's something very majestic about Genesis just saying that he did that. And then there's something deeply violent and personal about saying that God used his hand to separate the sea and get down to the personal action of being involved in making it happen. In the way God describes the Genesis account through the language in Job. And so all that Job-style language is used in this next chapter to describe promises both fulfilled and coming. All right. So a prayer of Habakkuk, the prophet, upon Shigionoth. There's an argument about what that is. It's only used one other time in Scripture, this word. It has two different meanings. One is error. Meaning that it was a prayer that comes upon the realization of one's error. The only other time that it was used was Psalm 7, I believe, when David is pleading with God against reputation against Saul and what Saul has done. Now, so the first one is dealing with the error of his first prayer. And this is my repentance. This is my starting over again, please. This is the prayer that I should have prayed in Habakkuk 1, but you had to get me through Habakkuk 2 so that I could know what was really going on, so that I could pray the prayer that was really supposed to be prayed in the first place. Right? It also means wandering with delight. All right? So there is nothing light, airy, and just like poppy about this chapter, but that is exactly the style of music that is describing being played. This is the happy wandering folk song that is done. This is sort of I probably listen to different music than most people. This is the progressive rock of the age, because it describes the wandering up and down the fretboard, the wandering of keys and notes and playing and all of that. Is sort of the wandering folk song, but also a wandering folk song. So that is done as the correction of error. All right. And the entire chapter can be summed up in verse 2. O Lord, I have heard thy speech and was afraid. O Lord, revive thy work in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years make known. In wrath remember mercy. Because Habakkuk is getting this revelation that God's never been off the throne. And that God has never blinked at the sin of the world and the invading armies. God is this. We live in a time when the world is, the church is the most mocked and looked down upon. We've gone from a time where the gospel was at least had some honor and recognition to a place where it's the damage of the cults that people have to get away from. The problem with that statement is they're not entirely wrong, because that's what we've done with the gospel. All right. God came from Teman. All of that was just preparation to get to Habakkuk 3. Okay, just as you know. God came from Teman, and the Holy One from Mount Paran, Selah. I read this week a description of Selah that I'd never read before. Most of the time we read it as the pause for contemplation. I read this past week about how it's still that pause for contemplation, using our modern English, during the drum solo. The drums of war that beat into you what was just said as you pause to have it driven. God came from Teman and the Holy One from Mount Paran. And since we never grew up in Israel, I've got to describe what he's saying. He's comparing two things. The sun rises in the east. The king rises and covers all of the land. But he's also describing he's saying, remember, there's a promise. See, he's going back to Deuteronomy 33. I didn't plan on going there either. Give me a second. Deuteronomy 33, which is 32 is the Song of Moses. 33 is when Moses knew he was going to die, so he's blessing all of the people of Israel. It says, this is the blessing wherewith Moses and the man of God blessed the children of Israel before his death. And he said, the Lord came from Sinai and rose up from Seir unto them and shined forth from Mount Paran. And he came with 10,000 of his saints from his right hand that went a fiery law from them. It continues on and on. It's going back to that image of the beginning of the blessing of Moses onto all his people. He's saying, remember, not only is God in charge, not only is he in charge and he shines light on everything, but the one that is in charge and he shines light on everything has begun all of this with a promise and a blessing for his people. His glory covered the heavens, and the earth was full of his praise. And the brightness was as the light, and he had horns coming out of his hand, and there was the hiding of his power. Before him went pestilence, and burning coals went forth at his feet. He stood and measured the earth, and beheld and drove asunder the nations, and the everlasting mountains were scattered. The perpetual hills did bow. His ways are everlasting. We could spend about a month on this. So the brightness, and his brightness was as the light, and he had horns coming out of his hands. Is playing on words. Horns is a description of authority and power. But he's not saying horns like a goat has horns or a bull has horns. He's not saying those are coming out of his hands. No, he's saying that the beams of light, like if you had a really powerful flashlight and you could actually see the beam, that those were coming out of his hands. Almost describing it like if it was really dark in here and I had a super bright flashlight and I pointed at you, you would be blinded by the light and unable to see the flashlight. The flashlight itself the light would hide the source. All right, that's what's being described here. That he came, that he was on Mount Sinai, and he had all the thundering and the lights and the flashing and the voice and everything, and the display of God was so large and so bright and so terrible that the display hid the presence. He was fully there, but being on display, his very display hid him. His brightness was the light, he had horns coming out of his hands, and there was the hiding of his power. Not that his power was hidden, but the display of it was too much for you to take, so that you couldn't see through the display to get to him. Just like you can't see through the powerful light to see the flashlight bulb on the other side, because it's just so bright and so powerful. The display was the hiding of his power. And as you go through this as a description, he's going through the times of the promise of Abraham, the times of Moses, and the times of Joshua. He's also going through the description of how he's dealt with his people and how he dealt with creation. And because there's this constant playing back and forth in all of Scripture we tried to go over it some last week, of the description of the fall and them leaving, and then all of the choosing of sin over choosing of the promise leads you right back to that moment of cursing. I tried to bring it back. We've described before the temple as it was built was built as a description of when they left the garden and there was the angel with the fiery sword, that the entering of the temple was like going back into Eden. It was the doorway back into Eden, metaphorically speaking. That it was getting back in the presence of God beyond sin. It was getting back to the perfection of creation. It was getting back to what he promised would be restored. So we've got this description of the way God is building his people is being compared to the way God created the earth. We get that. That's how big this is. All right. He stood and measured the earth, and he beheld and drove asunder the nations, and everlasting mountains were scattered. The perpetual hills did bow, his ways are everlasting. I saw the tents of Cushan in affliction, and the curtains of the land of Midian did tremble. Was the Lord displeased against the rivers? Was thine anger against the rivers? Was thy wrath against the sea, that thou didst ride upon thine horses and thy chariots of salvation? Again, he's not talking about just one thing here, but the idea is, remember when you brought us out of Egypt and we were backed up against the Red Sea, and you caused the Red Sea to go up a way so that we could pass through, and then the enemy passed through and the sea came back down on them? Oh, and you remember that time when we were going into the promised land and we walked through the river of Jordan, and instead of just making the pathway in the river, you actually backed it up all the way to Adam? as we walked into the promised land. See all the imagery of going back to the garden, of getting everything right, of fixing everything, the main promise being better than the way it was before, but for our image, going back to perfection. He went all the way back to Adam as they walked over. So when you were doing all of this, were you angry at the rivers? Why? What do you think his relationship with the Red Sea was at that moment? You were not allowed to flow the way you were supposed to flow. I am stopping you from you doing your job. Was he angry at the sea when he did that? When it's in Genesis, the very beginning, when he split the land from the seas, was he angry at the seas for going in and saying, no, this isn't your spot now, I'm giving this to the land? Oh, you don't actually think he has a relationship with his creation beyond you? You don't think the rocks would cry out and that all of creation groaneth, and all of that doesn't stem from a relationship with his creator, that it does not involve you? Are we so egocentric to think that we're the only things that have ever been created by God? No, everything he's created has a relationship with him. Was the Lord displeased against the rivers? No, he was willing to deal with them that way for you. Amen. Which is the point we're getting to. Thy bow was made quite naked, according to the oaths of the tribes, even thy word. Bow being made naked means it's been put to use. It's been unsheathed. It's been quivered. If it's covered, it's in its sheath and not being used. If it's been made naked, it's been taken out. The arrows are taken out of the sheath. They've been made naked because they're being put to use. You might even say the promise is being put to use. Yes. The mountains saw thee, and they trembled. The overflowing of the water passed by. The deep uttered his voice and lifted up his hands on high. You hear the Job creation language and all this. Then we pass Moses and we get to Joshua. And we get the sun and moon stood still in their habitation. At the light of thine arrows they went, and at the shining of thy glittering spear. Thou didst march through the land in indignation, and thou didst thresh the heathen in anger. All right. I'm going to stop before verse 13 because I just want to sum up and describe what he's saying here. Because this is the revelation of Habakkuk that the church seems to have lost. And I just need to pray for revelation of this. Is because we enter into this conversation from the perspective of, I'm the good one, they're the bad ones, God take care of the bad ones. And what's been revealed to him is going back through all of the history of fulfilling of the promise. I'll read 13 just to describe it. Thou wentest forth for the salvation of thy people, and for salvation with thine anointed. There was a promise here. I'll keep reading. Thou woundest the head out of the house of the wicked by discovering the foundation unto the neck, Selah. Then we've gone back to Joshua with his head on the necks of all the kings that he had to conquer. And we've got all this image of what he's done. All right. So everything he did, God went for the salvation of his people and for the salvation with his anointed. Everything was for the fulfillment of the promise of taking care of his people and for the coming of the Messiah. Yes. Everything he does with the church is for the fulfilling of his promise and for the second coming of the Messiah. All right? Everything is geared towards using his people to fulfill the end of his promise and to get to the end of what we call his story. All right? Everything. So what did he do? What is he talking about that he went through in everything that he did? He's talking about how because of pestilence, they went into Egypt, and he took them out of Egypt, and he dealt with Egypt, and he took them through the wilderness, and he gave them the law, and he gave them the promise, and that started this. He showed them that who he was and what their relationship was, and he brought them into the promised land, and he went before them, and don't you even remember that when they sent the spies into the land? And they said, oh yeah, we thought you were going to be here decades ago. They've been trembling and waiting for you. That the reputation of God had gone before them, and that God had gone forth, and that's why it says the tents of, verse 7, I saw the tents of Cushan in affliction, and the curtains of the land of Midian did tremble. All of the nations of the area were trembling. They knew that the people of God were coming in. They didn't stand a chance. All right? That means that everything God does for and through his church is designed to keep the sin of the world at bay. Designed to keep it down, keep it back. And that he's given him this revelation that the reason is overwhelming them is because their role in the world stopped. Help me, O God, for the godly man ceaseth. That when the church stops proclaiming the gospel, the protective power of the gospel recedes. And so without any preserving nature of the law, sin overrides. And he's saying that God hasn't gone anywhere. The church has stopped being that preserving salt in the world. So that everything now the church is having to face is everything that was supposed to be held at bay and preserved from. Strange example, but my daughter and I watch a certain 90s sitcom at night, and she finds it funny. But my wife and I were talking the other night about how amazing it is a 90s sitcom. This is a Disney 90s sitcom. I just let you know. And they've had multiple episodes of the benefits of virginity and the necessity of sobriety and not taking any drinks. And all. Look at this. A Disney sitcom 30 years ago was preaching pro-virginity and anti-drugs and drinking. Right? How that's like what's promoted at the beginning of everything now. Even back in the 90s where at least John 3:16 might have been common. Now you go to the basketball games and someone's holding up the sign John 3:16. There's at least an understanding in society of what the gospel was. And they might not have believed it, but they at least appreciated the strength and the effect it had on people. And even by the 90s, that was way waning, way waning. But it had an effect in the rest of society of keeping some measure of morality, of peace, of keeping the violence at bay, of keeping the immorality at bay. And of course, by then, the wickedness was creeping in. But you see the point that the entire reason why they were walking through the land, God didn't just wipe everybody out and say, okay, you can go in there, was because it was how God was dealing with his people, kept the world safe from sin. And when the church rebelled against their God, when it became more of the cult of the emergent evangelical as opposed to the strength and the foundation of the gospel, when people no longer knew their God but just knew about the benefits of their God, when it was no longer about being filled with the Holy Ghost and walking in power and displaying the truth of the gospel and the presence of God and the wonderful benefits of salvation and all just the presence and the reality of the walk, and when it stopped being about that and it started being about numbers and making all the pride and making the money and all of these other things, that the protective power of the gospel just receded from the land. And that's where we're living in. How many generations past that have grown up and lived their lives without even the understanding of the gospel, without any protective covering of the gospel, when the church in America is just a remnant, a quiet remnant at that. There is no protection in the land, which is why the 5 woes that we just went over, we could go for a week and describe how America is guilty of all of them, all the way up and down, is because the majority of people have been given over. Which is why it was very important. We haven't done it, maybe we'll do it soon. It's very important to follow Romans 1 with Romans 2. Because all the people we're talking about in Romans 1, all the given over and all of those, the woes and all of the enemies and all of the bad ones and all of that camp are enemies of God that you are not to judge. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. No, who do you think you are? You were a sinner saved by grace. You're not a sinner anymore. You are now saved by grace. But you were a sinner. So you should not look upon them and see anything other than those who are in desperate need of the gospel. And the enemy of God aspect that they really are will be taken care of by Him. But you are supposed to be the ones that are the shining beacon of the gospel in a lost and a dying land. And the very fact that it is as hard as it is and as hard as it's going to get, the revelation of that is not that God was off the throne. The revelation is that we stopped being the salt and the light. And so, as much difficulty that will come is judgment, yes. But it is what must be gone through in order for the gospel to be displayed. Oh, if this is the last round and he's coming soon, then that's one thing, but that's not necessarily the case. It doesn't have to be there. We could have generations going from now. The point is not, are we in the end times? We've been in the end times since he left. The point is his church going to be the salt and the light? Is the church going to be vocal enough about the gospel so that the gospel is at least generally known and understood to exist by the world at large? They've got to deal with it. Will you preach it, whether they will hear, whether they will forbear? That part doesn't matter. God's glorified in either case, and they have to deal with him in either case. My question is it known, or is the cult of evangelicism is that what's known? Is the testimony? No, we're not even surprised anymore when a youth leader is caught molesting his kids. We're not surprised anymore when the pastor of an evangelical church is caught in an affair. We're not surprised by these things anymore. The mere fact that we're not surprised should demonstrate how far down this rabbit hole we've gone. When they go, oh wow, someone who was preaching the gospel fell that far. When the gospel holds strength again because the strength of it is declared and shown over and over again. Whether they will accept it or not, at least it's back in contention as being real. The church has lost that a long time. The world lost that a long time ago because the church lost it even before that. But that's what he's gone back through and saying all the times that God moved and moved for his people. And moving for his people had the preserving effect on the world, had that trembling, had them moving back. And he's saying, oh God, revive thy work in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years, make known. You just put verse 2 and verse 13 together and you can have the entire chapter. Because all of this was, you went forth for the salvation of your people. And you went forth for the salvation with the Messiah, your anointed. And you put that heel on the head of the serpent. You discovered his head. Thou woundest the head of the house of the wicked, discovering the foundations of his neck. You might have bitten your heel, but you found his head. Verse 14, thou didst strike through with his staves the head of his villages. They came at me as a whirlwind to scatter me. Their rejoicing was as to devour the poor secretly. That is, walk through the sea with thine horses, through the heap of great waters. They wanted to, when the enemy comes in like a flood. You hear this, they came in, and they came out of a whirlwind to scatter. They're coming doing everything, all the flamboyant stuff, all of the distracting stuff, all the violent stuff, just to shut you up. It means you got to be saying something for them to need to shut you up. Yes. See, right now in America, we're experiencing the devil is just displeasure at our presence. They're not trying to shut you up because you haven't said anything to be shut up. That's right. Come on. The devil just doesn't like God's presence. He's trying to set that city up on a hill, that nest on the hill. He's trying to separate. He's causing a shame to his own soul. All in that second woe. You get that? That's what's going on. At least say something. so that they can try to shut you up. Even the world calls that the Streisand effect. Anybody ever heard of the Streisand effect? If there's something you want to be kept secret, don't sue somebody to make sure they can't say it, because you bring attention to the very thing you try to force them to not to do. No, that we should have the gospel Streisand effect. That as much as they try to shut you up, somebody's going, oh, what are they trying to not like get you to say? What are they trying to keep silent? What are they trying to hold down? What free speech are they trying to hold back? Because it's the burned books that we want to read. Oh, that is walk through the sea with thine horses. You're in charge of it all. Don't you love those verses in Job where it says, and he talked to Leviathan? And where were you when he set the stars? All the big stuff. Separating the seas from the land, that's a nice idea until you get out there on a boat and you see how big the seas really are. And then you realize the God that by his hand went in and separated all, that must be one big God, because that is one big sea. When I heard, my belly trembled. My lips quivered at the voice. Rottenness entered into my bones, and I trembled in myself. Basically, that just means that his knees went jelly and he couldn't stand anymore. Because the effect of the strength of this revelation, that everything they've walked through, all of the destruction they've walked through, is all of the stuff that God was preserving the world from through them. So he's saying, continue thy work. Oh, Daniel prayed in Daniel chapter 9. He said he went back through the word, and he counted by the measure of counting that was given through Jeremiah, and he found out the number of the days of the captivity. And he went on to say that we know that you are righteous, and our righteousness is of you. But as for us, we are the face of confusion. And that's got to be the starting place, as opposed to save us righteous ones from the bad ones. It starts with, we were sinners, but we've been made righteous, but we have no righteousness apart from the righteousness that is yours, that has been given to us. And as soon as we try to exalt ourselves as having any righteousness beyond that, we bring to ourselves confusion, and we heap upon the world the destruction that the world is trying to heap upon us. When I heard, my belly trembled, and my lips quivered at the voice. Rottenness entered my bones, and I trembled in myself, that I might rest in the day of trouble. That I might rest in the day of trouble. There is a day that he would bring me rest. But he realized unto himself that in the day when it was most needed to stand up, he wanted to sit down. Rottenness entered in my bones, and I trembled that I might rest in the day of trouble. When he cometh up to the people, he will invade them with his troops. Because there's going to be a reckoning. It was never an issue of, will God defeat Babylon? That was never the question. God will defeat Babylon. God will fulfill his promise. God will bring everything to a conclusion. God is going to deal and finally judge the world. That's not what's at issue. He was balking over the fact that they're having to deal with such an overwhelming presence of the world invading their life, when they were the very ones that were supposed to hold the world back with the presence of God. And when they lost the presence of God, there was nothing to hold the world back. Although the fig tree shall not blossom, neither shall fruit be in the vines, the labor of the olive shall fail, and the fields shall yield no meat, the flock shall be cut off from the fold, and there shall be no herd in the stalls. Oh, there's coming a time when this is going to describe the world completely. Whether that time is now or not remains to be seen. But the question is not, is this going to happen? The question is, how is your faith whether this is going to happen or not? Whether this is now or whether it's sometime far in the future, do you depend on the blessings of God to trust in the goodness of God? You see, whether all of that has happened or not, yet will I rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. Paul said he knows how to abound and he knows how to be abased. The church hasn't known how to be abased in America in 150 years. Go around the world. There are countries the church know how to be abased because they've got to have secret church and the back alleys, and they have to sing really quietly and do all these things just so they won't be captured, so they can have a chance of shedding the gospel more. And, when's the last time the gospel was that precious to you? That it was so precious that you... When's the last time free speech was so precious to you that you had to use it to share the gospel? When your life was a description of the gospel, when it was just so active that you couldn't help but make it known. The Lord God is my strength, and he will make my feet like hinds' feet, and he will make me to walk upon mine high places. Oh, and it just highlights the deceitfulness of sin. Random. Ever seen those videos of goats walking up the side of mountains like sheer cliff face? I saw this video. It was a palm tree that was straight up, and this goat wasn't just like hopping up its side. He was actually walking down straight. I have no idea how this goat was doing it, but he was walking straight down this tree that was going straight up. And the caption was, "Gravity doesn't have anything on goats." But that's this description here of somebody who has been made so sturdy and strong that they can just hop around the highest of mountains without missing a beat. But it should highlight so much the deceitfulness of sin, because you should compare that he makes my feet like hinds' feet to walk upon the high places of the mountains without falling, with woe to him that coveteth an evil covetous to his house, that he may set his nest on high, that he may be delivered from the power of evil. That we demand to be up there, but we have no strength in ourselves to actually thrive there. So we have to force it all around us through sin. He just makes us to be able to live in the high places with him. He just makes it so it's natural to be with him and natural to proclaim him. You get on the ground and you start talking about the wonderful nature of being up on the cliff hidden with God. The Lord is my strength. He will make my feet like hinds' feet. He will make me to walk upon high places. To the chief singer on my stringed instruments, for this joyful folk song of all of the destruction that the presence of God has in this world, that is good for the world because it holds all the sin and death at bay through you. To the people who have to be convinced in their soul that they've not had the presence of God, and they've not been that salt, and that every single difficulty in their life right now is the result of a lack of the power of God in their life.
Thank you so much for joining us for this video message. We do hope it's been a blessing for you. Again, we invite you to reach out to us with specific prayer requests. We invite you to reach out to us, especially if the Lord has shown you that you are lost and you've prayed to be saved. We'd love to be a continuing blessing to you in your walk with the Lord. So please do reach out to us. We are open to emails, we're open to text messages, we're open to phone calls. And we do have a brand new location. We're excited to be in Paughtown, North Carolina, and if you are close to that area especially, we'd love to meet you in person. So please do reach out to us, and we would love to be help to you in planning your visit. And again, help us to continually reach people with these messages. If they're a blessing to you, please feel free to share them with friends, with family, with co-workers, with neighbors, with anyone who's right around you. Please do feel free to share these messages. And thank you again for listening, and may the Lord richly bless you.